We are right on time. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Spencer. In fact, I can bring up this little thing here with my email address and my Twitter handle. Welcome to this little Motion Playground live stream, episode 2. We're still kind of testing this out and keep this small. So, just using this for this Apple Motion Facebook group. Uh, Primarily because there's so many new people coming in here. We've got about 8,000 members here. And I just thought it'd be fun for folks who may be in motion to have a place to get your questions answered. If you have questions, you can post them right here. In fact, if you're watching, maybe just go ahead and say hi, and I can see that you're here. Um, and in the meantime, I'm just going to kind of play around with some things. And part of the reason I'm keeping this small is in case I make a fool of myself, because I really, instead of doing something very structured like our tutorials um, and our MacBreak Studios and all of our YouTube content, this is more just to play around with motion, answer your questions, uh, and have a little fun in the process. So it's primarily, I'm hoping that this evolves into something more mostly answering questions. But in the meantime, I will just uh, start doing some things. And please, however, at any time, excuse me, feel free to post something. So last time I did this a couple weeks ago, I did a lot of stuff with emitters, particle emitters. And I thought this time I would play around with paint. I haven't done a lot of stuff with paint in motion in a while. I've got a full tutorial on working with paint, which I'll show you here. Sorry for that, there, right there, um, yeah, on rippletraining.com. But I thought we'd just play around with paint because it's a lot of fun. I don't really have a specific plan here, but I'm going to jump in and fool around a little bit. So I just have an open motion project here, uh, nothing in it at all. And you might, if you're new to motion, you might notice a little paint tool right down here, paint stroke tool that you can invoke by clicking it or using the keyboard shortcut P. And if you do bring it up and you have your heads up display open, which by the way is F7, or on my laptop it's function F7. And if you click this little shape style thing, it has a pop up and a bunch of different presets you can choose from. By the way, here's brushes floral pack. I'll explain in a minute. You'll see all these other little presets, including this basic airbrush and basic solid. And there's a little thing here you can draw around. You can adjust the width before you start to draw something, make it much smaller. See what it looks like in there. You can display that looks like anime. Gives you a preview just to get a sense of what's happening. If right on checked and smoothing checked, and then with that tool selected, if you then draw uh, in screen, sorry, in view, you get a little paint stroke, which is fine. Um, However, it's usually not the way I prefer to work with paint, and the reason is, well, let me go over a couple things here. So I've got this paint stroke. It's animated. It's got this right on behavior in here, and you might say, well, I want to choose a different preset. But if you go try to choose something, go to light and try to choose something, nothing happens because all it's doing right now is setting you up for a new paint stroke. If you want to affect the current one, you need to switch your tool out of the paint stroke back to the default selection tool, which is Shift S. So if I press Shift S, you can see the display changes. And now if I go to the shape styles and go, for instance, choose a liquid here, uh, now you can see that that's placed the one that's currently in. So once you've drawn a stroke, let me hit Option Command O for play range out point, start playback. You can then select different presets and they'll automatically populate what you've drawn. Now, the reason I don't really like using the paint stroke tool, well, let me put it this way. The paint strokes tool is great for this kind of, excuse me, organic hand-drawn look. And if you're using a Wacom tablet or similar, you can create this, you can draw with it, which is great. I'm usually drawing with a mouse, and I usually like my strokes to be uh, smoother, put it that way. So if I right-click and choose Edit Points, you'll see that when you use paint stroke tool drops a lot of points down, and you can manipulate all these, and you can reduce the number of points. And in fact, it's reduced by default because when you use the paint stroke tool, if you have moving turn points. But here's kind of the way I prefer to use it. So I'm going to delete everything in here, and instead, I'm just going to use the Bezier tool right here, which is basically a pen tool. The reason I like to do this is I can click, draw, and make a very path without a lot of points. Something like that. And I can adjust those points and just make something that's very simple. I might want to be part of a bigger composition. I want something clean and smooth. I can do that, and then again, you need to switch out of the tool, so Shift S, and turn off the fill. So I've got this little outline. And now that I have that, what I can do is go to Shape Styles and choose different things. You can choose these up front, but if I choose like Light Tail for now, I've got a much smoother, sorry, got rid of it, light and light streak. And I've got a much smoother light streak. Really should have updated the look of it too. Let's try something else, Light Tail. Yeah, just not updating the color. I can change the color here to something else. Let's try textural and iron fillings. And let's try traditional acrylic. Now, it's funny now. I'm finding this is why you never know. I'm not really getting what I want by applying presets to it. It's not switching them for me. So go to abstract and right here. Very interesting. It's not changing one more time because that's not my the Bezier pen tool. Draw something. Return. Turn off the fill. And simple line. This is what a paint stroke is. I mean, at the bottom line is now we've got this paint stroke symbol. A paint stroke is simply a shape without a fill. If I turn the fill on, you can see that the icon changes. Turn the fill off, and now it's a paint stroke. Just by doing that, it happens to be a paint stroke made of a single solid line. Where things is kind of interesting, if I change that brush type from solid to an airbrush, and let's just increase the width, and see it's kind of soft now. And this airbrush is actually made up of little individual components called dabs. So even though it looks like a solid line, and it looks a little soft on the edges, but you can open the brush profile and pull the white over and see I can make it look more solid by doing that. Or I could option drag on another one or click and add another one. And it looks like a solid line, but you start to see that it looks a little scalloped. And that's because if I increase the spacing, once you change the brush type of a paint stroke to an airbrush, it's actually made of separate little components, little things called dabs. And it creates a illusion of a continuous stroke by decreasing the spacing so they're very close together. So once they're close together and a little softer edge, you get the illusion of a single line. So with that said, let's go back to our shape style and try again to put on, let's say, oh, I'd play with something fun. Let's try the light streak and see if it works this time. So I'm getting the light streak. I'm still not getting the color. So let's go in and play with this. See, it's even showing it as a color here. You know what I think I did? Yes. So what I did is when I tapped the keyboard, I tapped A. So A, or Shift A, I turned on the alpha. I turned on alpha right here, Shift A. So it looked white and it wasn't. Uh, I'll go back to color, Shift C, and that's why before, when I was choosing different presets, they were all staying white. So now that I've got my simple curve selected, I can use these different shape styles and choose different presets to see what these look like. And to me, it's a sort of an easier way to preview some of these things rather than little heads-up display. Here's acrylic. So once you've got these presets going, you can always go in and manipulate this path. And I had recording turned on, which is why that animated there. Let me get rid of the keyframe. There we go. So you're free to manipulate it, you're free to add points to it. And then if it's not animated, because it's a shape, you can go to behaviors and go to shape and choose right on and trim that right on O. And anything you have right on. And play range out point, option. And over in behavior inspector for the speed, I can change to each both. So it starts out slow, slows down towards the end. Now, all these presets, you can do a ton of things with them. I'm going to delete. You can see there's a source, a brush source. So by default, that brush source was simply a white little dab, but you can have any little graphic or movie be a brush source. In this case, it's a little paint sliced thing. But if I wanted to put that ink sponge there, I could just drag that in and have that be a source. Or I could bring any object into that well, either a movie or a graphic, and take those individual pieces. You can kind of think of it like a replicator because it's just creating copies of an object along this path, and you can manipulate what they look like. I'll put that paint thing back in there just to see that. And you can select them that way, or you can go to shape styles here, or you can go to library and go to shape style and see all these different shape styles here. Yeah, a little bit tricky. I think for these, you drag them on as a whole separate shape, and then what you could do is take this sliver, for example, back in the inspector and drag it over top of the well to make that particular shape out of it. Now, let's take a look at the one I added, this little light tail, because this is really pretty and sort of help sort of understand the possibilities of this thing. I'm going to right click on it and use edit points. You can see it's very short, but you can, everything is changeable. What I love about this, besides all this real-time playback, add a few points to. I'm option clicking, by the way, to do that. Sorry about my voice today. And now that whole, and let's check out kind of what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to stop playback. Before we get to the animating, you can see the brush source is this little sliver 06. And what's kind of cool about this is if you go to the library and go down to, I think it's under content particle images. And in the particle image, go all the way down to the essence. There's all the slivers that are built in. You can see there's simple little graphics that have sort of gradients applied. So if I want it to be this one instead, I could drag this over this to replace it. And now I'm using that one as my source image. So I can just drag these over to swap that out and get a different source image each time to create that look. And you could, of course, create your own as well. So go back to this one. That was pretty cool. And by the way, just if you're watching this, want to ask a question, please go ahead and post or just say hi. It'd be great to know if here. So I've got this running, and let's take a little bit of more of a look besides just swapping the image of kind of how this is made, how it works, because if you understand how it works, you can do so much more with it. So first of all, it's animated using the first point and last point offset, which is really the same thing the write-on behavior does. So instead of this being animated here with these keyframes, what we could do, I could delete these keyframes and let's just use the behaviors shape write-on and O for an output. And see, no, it's not going to work in this case. See, this is why we do this live. Go back to first point and last point offset, undo, and figure out why is not exactly the same thing. So the first point offset and last point offset on the shape. And I think a write-on would work for that. So let's come back to that. Because what I want to show you is how you can manipulate this. So obviously width, and if you go too big on the width, you'll start to see we're just expanding the size of that little object. And it starts to not get as manageable. So you don't want to go too wide on it. And you'll also notice additive blend is turned on. So where it overlaps, it's getting brighter. Okay. So remember where it overlaps. So oh wait, that would be spacing. So if I increase the spacing, you can see there, it just made up of these, looks like a little dog bone that is along the path. And it looks like it's kind of turned path. So let's see why that's the case. If we go to angle over stroke, now we can see that the angle changes over the stroke. There's a path for this. I could move this down, and now the angle doesn't change over the stroke. Okay, so you can change how it changes the stroke. I could add keyframes to that and change it a different way over the stroke. I believe you can smooth that keyframe. Yeah, command drag and that angle over the stroke. So now if I go back to the style and reduce that spacing and go back to our stroke, we can just play with how that how that twists, basically. See how we're changing how much it twists over the stroke with that stroke parameter. So that's how it's changing over the course. It's animating on by keyframing the offset, but then actual dabs themselves are twisting along the path based on this parameter here. So reset that parameter, and now it's staying aligned path. I'll bring it back up, and let's look at a few other things. Too much. There's a lot of detail in here. This is what I love about these paint strokes is they're very complex. They started very simple. You can just draw one and be done with it. Just add it to your graphics composition. But it can be kind of fun to really dive deep in what's possible with these things. So in the style section, obviously we don't want to fill because that's going to change it back to a regular shape. Outline is as a source. See, the brush type is set to image. I could always go back to an airbrush and got this simple thing here and color that. And in fact, if it were an airbrush, there's a few things you can do with this. Let's just keep that airbrush from. We already saw how you can increase the spacing. And take the brush profile, tab solid, and a little bigger. Maybe we want to purposely space them, so we just have little dots on here, and make it brighter by dragging that green, so they're brighter. Additive blend, again, that's just if they overlap, so we don't need that. Now we have something completely different where the dots draw, and you can see they're kind of spinning around as well. So just one idea of like how you can create a bunch of dots along any kind of path, and go to the stroke tab. Let's set the brush angle here, and let's reset the angle over stroke, and see there's still movement. I'm going to turn that off for now, just so you can see something more simple. Okay, so we've got an airbrush with one color, single brush color, full opacity, and pretty wide, and spaced far apart. Draw the path, and again, the path is fully editable. You can have it draw any path that you want. You can see there overlap because we've got Blender. Let's not play that for a minute. You can see where it creates something brighter, blending together. So opacity overstroke, this is because the preset had this varying opacity. If I set this guy here, well, let me reset. Let's just go to, trying to see if there's a way to quickly reset the, I can just select a different one. The opacity is 100% overstroke. The stroke mode is using the brush color. What does that mean? Back here in the style, we brush color. But instead, in the stroke tab, I could say color over stroke, and tags here. Select, if I add a little color tag here, and get colors, color it over stroke, starting from white to blue to pink, which you can see there. So if I go back to style tab and spacing, and still have that added blend, turn that blend, so it gets brighter, and it's so bright here, they're so close together. But if I turn that off, now we have a gradient for that stroke going there. So as it draws up, great, nice color, not bad, kind of fun. Rather than color over stroke, you can pick from color range, which will be a kind of a random thing and look a little funky in this case. But if you were to make these spaced out a lot, you could create something basically picking colors out of the gradient and create that effect with that. But it's going to be close together. Back in the stroke tag, probably effective to get that gradient look. You can repeat that look a little here by repeating the color, going through white to blue, pink over and over again as many times as you want. Now, there's some cool stuff in here. Let me jump to the geometry tab just to show you. Basically, this is just the all the control points, and you can make it here or directly in the viewer, which I do directly in the canvas. So, not a lot to do with that right now. Let's go through the stroke in a little more detail. And again, you got a question about this or anything motion in your own projects, please feel free to post that. I'm not necessarily saying just ask questions about paint strokes here at all. So spacing over stroke is kind of cool because by default the spacing is equal. So what I mean by the distance between tabs is exactly the same. If I go back to the style tab, spacing 1%. Don't know what it really means 1%, but it's very close together. So here I could say, hey, in the middle of this thing, control point, spread them out more, and then really go by. There, now we see them spread. Now they're tight together at the beginning, spread out, and come tight together. And again, this is so cool. You can add Bezier handle on this curve. And keep dragging so that the only part very middle section here and click auto fit. It's funny, auto fit doesn't do auto fit. It does. Click auto fit. So scroll up here and this guy. Right click on and I really want to get back to a straight line. That or could hold the option key down, break them. So there the top and the part. Okay, facing over stroke. I don't use that a lot, but it's interesting. Probably some stuff you can do. So I'll close that down. Fixed brush dabs. And with overstroke. So once I turn that on, get that, uh, so width overstroke is not letting it look like, but you can change how wide this is. This is really uh, gets more interesting. In fact, if I right click in here, I should be able to edit. So click here. And sorry, I'm trying to remember this. I haven't done this for a little while because I know there's a way that you can change the thickness along the stroke, and that should be this width over stroke. And, and do it. Oh, okay, well, we'll hold off on that because it's an important thing to be able to do. And stroke, there we go. Right click, choose stroke, and I think I don't know why I can't see my stroke anymore. Shift S, right click, edit points. There. Right click and choose stroke. Very I fixed brush depth. All right. I'm not sure. Definitely done this before. Maybe change the width over the stroke. Might be because I started with a preset. The sound is very choppy on Facebook. Sounds like an encoder problem. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've got echo cancellation turned on. What I'm gonna do, turn my audio all the way down, so it shouldn't be a feedback problem. I'm gonna, since I'm not coming out my speakers, maybe that'll help. Let me know. Facebook, if you use a 3D stroke, can you create a shape in 3D space, meaning draw in Z depth? Great question. Great question. So let me explain that a little bit. So what we're going to do with our stroke that we have now, I'm going to add a camera. Switch to 3D and orbit the camera. And you can see right now, we actually look like we're in 3D as I rotate this around. Let me explain why. I'm going to select this guy, and for our stroke, down here at the bottom, let's close some things down. I'll come back to these. They're great. All these are great to play with. Local 3D is turned on and face camera is turned on. If I turn off local 3D and rotate it, see now it's flat? Or I can turn on local 3D and turn off face camera, and it's still flat. It's on a plane. Now, if I enable face camera, all that means is each dab, which in this case is just a round, it's a circle, it's a little dot, is turning to face the camera as I move, okay? It can look a little weird if I do the dabs in depth order, then it should stay based on their depth, and there you see they're intersecting. But it's still on a plane, okay? And that's why this is intersecting here. And you might right click and choose edit points and then try to manipulate these, but you're never going to come off of a plane. In other words, no matter what, this is still going to be on a 2D plane, even though each particle, or each dab, I should say, is turning to face the camera. So the short answer is, by default, wait, sorry, I got a couple questions here. Much better sound, although my voice is terrible this morning, so I really apologize for that. I've got something problem with my voice. Could you please small down the email thing? It covers a huge part of the screen. Oh my God, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't mean to leave that on. Didn't leave that on. This is why we're doing it as a test. There you go. So here's where we're going with this. This is still a 2D plane. So paint strokes are always on a 2D plane by default. You cannot make them in 3D space. There is a workaround to that, which is I'll describe now because I don't want to leave this quite yet. But let me see if I can just do it. The workaround is to use an emitter instead on a motion path. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm just going to turn this one off, and I'm going to reset the camera. I'm going to make a new group. I'm going to hit C, hold the shift key down. I'm going to make a little circle, okay? And what I'm going to do now is create an emitter out of this by hitting E. So we're back to emitters here, but this is going to be a little different, okay? So this emitter, I'm going to set the speed to 0. And then for the shape of the emitter, I'm going to choose geometry. And then what I'm going to do is, let me make sure I'm doing this right. Let me think for a minute, because I want to do this along a motion path. Because a motion path, okay, here's what I want to do. So it's still going to be a point, but I'm going to animate this along a motion path. Basic motion, motion path. And I get a line, okay? So what I did is I applied the motion path behavior to the emitter. So by default, the emitter is going to move, let me get rid of that play range, Option X, along that, along this path. And of course, I can add lines to this motion path if I Option click, sorry, a little hard to hit there, add point. This motion path, you can add different points to. And this is basically behaving like a paint stroke now, because the emitter is emitting points, maybe a little too many, let me drop that down a little bit, of this circle along this path, and there's no speed. If I were to increase the speed, they'd start going all over the place like that, right? Which can also be very cool, but right now I just want to create this path that's animated along. The reason it's disappearing there is because the life is 5 seconds. If I increase the life, it'll stay there the whole time. And let's also just change its color mode to colorize, or actually let's go over life, and then we've got a little color. So we're getting close to what we would do with a paint stroke, right? So let's say we start with it yellow and we end with it dark blue and start with it kind of orange. And now it starts orange. And this over life means, you know, it's changing over the time these exist, they're changing color. So it's not quite the same thing. Okay, so you might say, great, but so what? Okay, so if I, look, if I orbit the camera, it still looks flat, right? But with this emitter, I can turn on 3D for the emitter right here. And I can also turn on face camera, which is on by default. So now if I turn it, we have what we had pretty much before. I'll also turn on additive blend and then reduce the birth rate just so we get, I can't reduce it too much. What I'm going to do is make the opacity lower so that additive blend doesn't get too light. So I'll lower the opacity and increase the birth rate just so we get sort of a nicer color going along here. Kind of like that. There we go. So now if I turn it again, it's still on a plane. However, here's the cool thing. When you use a motion path, that motion path, those points, if I select the Behaviors tab and open a Control Points, look at that, X, Y, and Z, okay? So let's see, this should be point 2 right here. I'll jiggle it, yeah. So I can take that point and move it in 3D space, like that. So now when I orbit the camera, I'll pan it over a little bit, we can see this is actually drawing in 3D space. Okay, so we're effectively faking a paint stroke by using an emitter that's moving along this line in 3D space and drawing this out. And I think what I would do is increase the birth rate more just so they're closer together. And then I'd make this opacity even lower. So I'll select the opacity and get really dark and increase the birth rate even more. And then we get this nice 3D paint stroke in 3D space. So hopefully that answers that question there. And let me just see if I'm able to bring up that question so people can see it here. So this was the question. Nope, that wasn't the question, sorry. That was the question. So I thank you for the question. I'm sorry, it only says Facebook user to me, so I don't know who you are. I can't talk to you. However, so that was an example of how to use an emitter to get over 3D space. But when you got a paint stroke, you can still do a lot of amazing things. So this is a 2D thing, okay? And it's drawing on. It's going to better performance because I'm not drawing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of particles in order to get it there, but it does a similar thing. But I want to just sort of finish in here and show you one other thing. I only can go to 9:45 today, about 10 more minutes, because I've got a gym appointment I've got to. But there's just a couple things I really want to show you here. Oh, Daniel Robert Cohn. Hey Daniel, thanks for checking in. So okay, the brush scale is how big that brush itself is, and you can increase that. I'm going to undo that. Let's stop playback. That's independent of the so that's basically the dab size. Think of that. So it's not the width of the stroke, but that's kind of the dab size there. And then brush scale randomness is super cool. So I can increase that and then decrease the brush scale. And it's going to make this thing look really kind of bumpy now. If I increase the randomness and bring this down more. Boy, I'm disappointed in the level of it. Let's go to the style and it decrease the width quite a bit, because I really want it to be a bumpier thing. There we go. Brush scale randomness, brush angle randomness, brush scale randomness, here it is. So it's increasing the randomness of the brush scale, and I'll start the brush scale. It needs to start with a decent level. Not nearly as bumpy as I want it to get, but you can kind of make a much bumpier look that way. Now, brush angle is not going to do anything with this one because I've got a round object. But if this were a different source object, for instance, if I go back to the shape, and for the shape source, we throw in, instead of airbrush, we say an image, and we drop this, we're back to this image. Okay, so now it's being drawn with that image. So now if I go back to the stroke and we look at this brush angle, you can see as I twist that, it's twisting the object. Before it was twisting a circle, which you're not going to see a difference when it's twisting a circle. Brush angle randomness, this is going to go crazy because it's going to be very rough now as each one is at a different angle from each other, so it's not going to be smooth anymore, so not useful in this case really. And then jitter can be really cool too, because if I just crank it up, it just spreads each piece out in 3D space. So that can be fun to play with. I think if we go back to our style, image, airbrush image here, and then let's bring the width down a little bit. Stroke, jitter. We'll spread these out. I have way too many. We should really spread those out separate from each other. Let me see, my brush scale is way too big. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. So now those are all spread out from each other by default. If I bring that jitter down, it's just a thin line, but this spreads them out. And what's kind of cool about this is you can jitter over the stroke. So this is kind of like what we did before, but now with jitter. So I want to say, hey, in the middle of the stroke, I want these to be really spread out. Look at that. Whoa. Super cool. And I only want it to do it in a small part, so I'll hold the command key down, and then I'm going to hold the option key down and have that jitter be just in the middle. Come on now. Break those handles. There we go. Okay, so now as it draws on, we should have very little jitter in the beginning, and then it spreads out there, and then it comes back tight again. So that's kind of cool. I would say finally, it took me a little while to get going here, but that's pretty cool with that jitter over stroke, and then the overall jitter is 0, but you could crank that up to get a little bit of both going on. And remember, the source object can be anything, so you can get really creative with this. I'll reset that, and jitter over stroke, and then finally what I want to show you just for this, and then there's one more thing I want to show you about how to make your own, which is really awesome, is I didn't go to advanced. So dynamics, let's choose show. Dynamics kind of turns a paint stroke into a particle emitter, because if I turn them on, you'll see what happens. If I crank up the speed, which is usually not set to 0, now those particles, once they're created, each dab is spreading out in 3D space. You can see that how they're really going wide. If I don't go quite as wide, it'll look like that. Or I can really crank them up and we get this big, nice explosion of these particles. Probably would look even cooler if my style was set to additive blend. Let's try that. Yeah, there we go. There we go. That's cool. Okay, and maybe bring down my speed so they're not spreading out quite as large. Let's start really small. Usually to go way too small, way too big to find something out. So I think that's pretty freaking cool. Especially, let's start with our stroke, our width to be smaller. So a lot of little tiny pieces. And our width, let's see if we can randomize those a little bit. So stroke, brush scale randomness, let's crank that up. So each dot's a little bit of a different size, and it can kind of look like a 3D thing. I mean, I'm generating thousands and thousands of copies of this. I'm playing back, I'm getting about 13 frames per second with this, which is kind of amazing in my mind. So that's where advanced really comes in. We can let's decrease the speed and increase the speed randomness for a little more chaotic look. In fact, I'll set the speed all the way to 0 and increase the speed randomness. And now they're all moving at different speeds. All right, so let's see, a couple comments. Super cool. Okay, great. Now, what I wanted to show you was this. If I go back, I'm going to just close this group, turn it off, and make a new group. I just want to leave you with the idea that you can create your own particle images. So if we go back to the library and we go to the shape styles where all these exist also, you'll see this one called Brushes Floral Pack. Or another way to see this is if you use the Paint tool and use the pop-up menu. What I did is I went out a few years ago and I picked a bunch of petals and leaves out in nature and I scanned them. And then I just used them as a shape source for a paint stroke, and then saved it as a preset. So for instance, if I pick Pink Daisy, you know, I can just draw and have these pink daisies on here. And if I press Shift S to get out of that tool, then I can go and increase the width. And you can see I've already got some randomness on them here, and they're writing on. And what's so cool about this is all of these things we've done apply to this about, you know, brush scale randomness and how you animate them on. So this is animated on with a write-on behavior, but you could also animate these on with, I'm going to delete that, with a shape sequence paint behavior. So if I add sequence paint and hit O, and then I choose a parameter, I'm going to add both scale, and I'll also add rotation. So we're going to come from 0 scale, and then we're going to rotate them a bit and choose this to ease in and out. And let's decrease the spread a bit. And now each of these will spin a little bit as they animate on. Increase the spread a little bit more. Okay, and this, because this is my own, I can switch out any of these things I've chosen. So if I select this guy, and I've got all these shape styles that I've built in, that I've added, this Brushes Floral Pack, you could switch this out to be any of these different objects, and it will be that particular thing. So you can scan your own content to be paint strokes. I'll just leave you with that idea. If you find that useful, you might want to check out this tutorial I have on drawing and animating shapes at Ripple, and I believe I can give you a discount on that if I can find it here. That's me, but I have that you can try out this 30% Ripple Live -30 to get 30% off on that if you're interested. That's me. Thank you for playing with me today. I hope to see you guys again. If you like this, please leave a comment in the Facebook feed, and if you're watching this as a recorded thing, leave a feedback if you'd like me to do this again. Take care, you guys.